Hello, I'm Sudhanshu, your host and navigator for the ever evolving world of HR. Here we are not talking just about policies or paychecks. We are diving into the heart of what makes organizations tick people. Whether you are an HR professional, a business leader, or someone passionate about workplace culture, this podcast is your gateway to the ideas and practices transforming businesses today. So, joining us today is Jimmy Nelson, who is an independent consultant in the learning and organizational development space. So, Jimmy, welcome to this podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey, thanks for having me on today. Really appreciate it. I love talking about learning and organizational development. I've actually been in learning and organizational development for over 30 years. I started in food manufacturing, believe it or not, way back there in 1994. So that's how I got my start. I've worked for a variety of different large and small organizations, spending most of my time focusing on improving or enhancing talent management. And that includes everything from hiring practices all the way through retiring. We often say hire to retire. I have a master's degree in management, a PhD in industrial organizational development. And also I've written a book back in 2004 and done a lot of speaking both locally and internationally. I love learning and organizational development. It is my passion. It is my world. It's really who I am. That's
Jimmy,
right.
your focus on growing organizational performance through people centered processes is
Mhm.
commendable. So, can you share some real world examples of how fostering a culture of continuous learning and resilience has positively impacted teams in your experience?
So one of the things that I really like doing is when I go into an organization to talk to them about how do they become more efficient, more effective, is I look at the people-centric processes. So how are they organizing and coordinating all of their people, right? The people who run the organization. When I went to work for this one particular company, they really didn't have any learning and organizational development whatsoever. So I had to build from the ground up. In fact, they were still doing pencil and paper performance evaluations. So just imagine doing that with 500 people, kind of crazy. So set up the system so that they would be able to easily move forward. Now I got a lot of resistance because it was an engineering company. Got a lot of resistance at the beginning of going from, well, I've done it this way for 20 years, and so why do you want me to do it that way? Until they started actually utilizing the system and figuring out that what used to take them 20, 25 minutes per person, they could do in 6. So one of my focuses is making sure that when we're looking at leadership of people, when we're looking at how we set up those systems, we try to make it so that the leader has more time to actually deal one-on-one with the employee and less time having to work in the system or work paperwork and the rest of those kinds of things. So for me, systemizing what we do is really critically important from a leadership perspective. Second story that I'll tell you is when I went into an organization and they had been doing training and development, but their focus was very singular. Most of the executives and the executive leadership, the office environment, basically had all of the training and development. And what they had done is they had accumulated 5 or 6 different content providers and just kind of shotgunned the approach towards them and said, okay, here's all the training out there, go take something. Well, you and I are not surprised that almost nobody did that. I think at the time, 6% of that population alone went and even took classes at all. So it was a huge waste of time. So one of the things that I focused on from that point forward was getting engagement. And so we started individual development plans as part of their performance management system so that as part of their evaluation, a part of how they do their job and what they did in their job was the learning piece. And so for me, that's kind of the first step of creating that learning culture so that people are constantly learning. And at the time, they had a top 20 in their succession planning. One of those people had even taken classes the entire year. Well, once we put in individual development plans and started kind of marketing and focusing on how do we get better, how do we improve our effective efficiencies, well, then we were at 100%. So engaging those people and their direct managers in that process of learning and saying, here's how we take the next step. Here's how you get to the next career level. Here's what you do when you really want to succeed. That kind of focus, I think, makes a huge difference. So again, part of it is building the systems so that they can do it easily, but also part of it is just having those conversations with those leaders and saying, hey, what do you think about getting everybody on board with the learning culture? So two critical examples, I think, of how we set up learning and development for success.
A lot of people talk about the Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation, example of how the implementation of Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation resulted in a significant increase in course effectiveness scores. And it
Mhm.
brought a notable ROI for the I lead class. So, can
Yeah.
you shed some light on how you did it? And how can other organizations leverage this framework to measure the impact of their learning and development initiatives effectively?
A good question. What's sad is that very few organizations actually do any kind of evaluation of their training and development courses. And so in reality, if you can't prove the worth of your course, it's very difficult to make that continue and make that grow. So Kirkpatrick has a very simple yet complicated way of doing that. They have 4 levels of evaluation. And really, even before you jump into evaluating your courses, before you start the whole entire process, it's doing the old Stephen Covey, which is begin with the end in mind. What do you want as an example or as a result or an outcome of the course that you're creating? Is it change in behavior in a certain way? Is it increased productivity? Is it decreased turnover? What is it that you're targeting? And remembering it's not just, oh, I want people to learn more. It's about the business. So how do we tie learning and development to the actual business needs and the business focus? So that's critically important. And really, that's what Kirkpatrick does. Just so get a really quick level one is basically at the end of the class, you ask the students, how was the class? Was it a good environment? Did the teacher do well? And all of those kind of things. Level two is the knowledge transfer. So oftentimes we do that in a pre-test, post-test. So we can say, here's what you knew before, here's what you know after. And so those two things a lot of companies do. Unfortunately, what they don't do is take the next 3 steps. And the next step is level 3 evaluation, where we're looking at the impact of that person who went through that training on their department. So if it was a leadership development, in this case, we're looking at what impact that person's behavior change or that person's improvement in skills had on that department. And then finally, the fourth one is what impact did it have on the organization? So I gained that information by asking that supervisor's boss or a department head to say, what did you see as a difference? Was turnover different, like we talked about? Did we improve efficiency? Did we, reduce the number of people in one operation and spread them to other operations? And then finally, the fourth piece is really ROI. So what kind of return on investment did we get? And the way that I achieve that, and it's never perfect, learning and development is just one piece that goes along with a whole ton of things that happen over a course time, over a time period of a course. And so what I do is I ask statistical questions to the person who participated in the class at level 3 by percentages, and the same thing for level 4. I talk about efficiency improvements, effectiveness improvement. We look at turnover, if that's one of the things we wanted to reduce, or effectiveness, efficiency of the lines. Maybe it's manufacturing parts per hour per person or whatever. So we look at those numbers and then do a calculation to say what impact did it actually have on the business that we talked about at the very beginning. And so the course that you're talking about, the one that I developed and ran for, it was a 8-week 4-hour course, kind of thing over a period of 8 weeks. The impact was we saw 125% return on investment using those kind of calculations. And so was it perfect? No, but at least it demonstrates to not only the person who's teaching the class, but also demonstrates to executive leadership, this has an impact. The one other thing that I like kind of throwing in there, just so that we can see what kind of impact it had, is basically comments from the class participant and their manager of, things that they saw. For instance, one of the things we had is we had 2 buildings, and the supervisors from both buildings went through the training class together. Well, they had never talked to each other, and one building actually fed the other building products. And so when we got to talking about that, one of the guys said, look, we take the product, we put it in a box, we seal the box, we put it on a pallet, we wrap it, and then we send it over to you. And the other person said, well, we get the pallet, we unwrap it, we unbox it, we pull the product out, and we put it in bins. And they went, well, that's silly. And so through that conversation, and it's kind of anecdotal, right? But still, they eliminated an FTE, moved an FTE somewhere else to be more effective because they stopped that practice. And a lot of it was just that communication. Well, if we didn't have the thought of how do we improve efficiencies going into this training class, they may not have had that conversation. And so again, that's our jobs as learning and development professionals, is get them thinking differently, behaving differently, and then looking at the business outcomes.
So now, as a leader in this space in learning and organizational development, you have guided training professionals across multiple states, international facilities. What challenges do you see emerging in managing learning programs in a global context, and how can organizations address these challenges?
So here's the key from my perspective, and kind of what I've learned over the years is that you must have a great vision in the learning and organizational development, and you got to get everybody to buy into that. And the only way you do that is through excellent communication. So you have to have a way so that when you're talking to people in another state or in another country, that there's a cadence of accountability through those conversations. So, I'm a lean guy, so I like Lean Six Sigma and, Agile and the rest of that. So whatever program your company uses in that regard, just utilize it to make sure that the employees that are out of the office, you would say, or whatever, are engaged and connected. And I love the weekly meetings and the daily one-on-one conversations with folks. In a manufacturing environment, I love huddles. At the very beginning of the time, let's huddle together. Well, you can do that virtually or in person. And so a 15-minute huddle doesn't take all that much time out of somebody's day. And, if they're in India or if they're in the United States or California or wherever they are, that 15 minutes can be really critical to what they do for the rest of the day. And then the other piece I think that we've kind of lost a little bit of as well, and I preach on this a lot, is that accountability. And I don't mean me holding you accountable. I mean setting up accountability so you hold yourself accountable for whatever it is. And so when we do the weekly meetings or the daily one-on-ones, I'm asking the question, tell me how you're doing. Tell me what's going on. What's your roadblocks? How's that project going? Give me some insight. And so then they spend the most of the time talking. Jimmy closes his mouth and listens, and they spend the most of the time talking about, well, I'm working on this project, I get this far, here's a roadblock that I have. And then from that point forward, then my job as a leader is to take those barriers, those roadblocks, or the needs that they have, and fulfill them, right? That's my job, is to serve them so that they can do their job more effectively. So I think a lot of times building in those accountabilities and letting them report them in and them talk about those, I think that's what makes a huge difference when you're talking about employees in different states or different countries.
Can you share specific anecdotes, or you can highlight some successful strategies in your uh, close to 30 years of journey in this space, I believe, which has demonstrated a positive impact of a well executed succession plan?
In the past, succession planning, especially executive succession planning, has been, you know what? I really like you and you work really good and you're here at 5 o'clock. So we're going to put you in a position where you can, move forward. Well, that's great if the person truly has the competencies and understands the role and can be successful, but oftentimes they're not. It's just the person that they like the best, and it's their gut feel that this person would be a great executive or a great leader or wherever they want to go. And so what I try to do is I try to put in a nondescript assessment process so that we can really get an assessment of where these people's competencies are and what their skills are, not only in their technical aspects of the job, which is important, but also in their leadership aspects. What are the competencies and the values that you want from a leader? So that's where I start a lot of times, is I start talking to the people that want the succession planning and saying, what competencies, what characteristics, what values do you want this person to have? Then once I've created kind of a competency model a value model or whatever, then the assessment is an easy process. And so then once they go through the assessment, excuse me, once again, once they go through that assessment, we then have a kind of structured way to say, here's where these people fall, and here's who comes to the top, who really could be the person that you're looking for this particular role or this particular area, or eventually maybe even the C-suite. So that assessment process is important, and a lot of it is communicating with the people who in the past has just done gut feel. So when in this particular healthcare organization, once I had completed putting all those pieces in place, then excuse me, then it was very easy then for me to convince the executives that you do this assessment and then you're going to get back data. So we're not just deciding on what our gut feel is, we're deciding on data. And it was really so good that the CEO, the president of this large regional hospital, actually created a video and sent it out to all leaders and said, look, in the past, we've done succession planning just kind of by, our gut feel. Well, Jimmy's put together a process, and so we're going to grow up. We're going to be a grown up and have a real succession planning process. And so the cool part about that was within the first couple of years, we dynamically changed the makeup of the people who were in the succession planning. So much more diversity, much more, across the board representation of who actually worked for the company. And then the cool part about that is we increased internal promotions by almost 20%, 18 point something, almost 20% internal promotions. And a lot of it, just from my perspective, was that they didn't even see some of their employees as people who could move up in the organization. It was like they didn't notice them. And then once we had this assessment process in place, all of a sudden they were noticed. And people were saying, oh, didn't realize that that person had that capability. And so it dynamically changed the way that we did succession planning. And they're still using that process today.
You also have expertise in performance management and learning management systems. Now they have moved to LXP's learning experience platforms. How do these systems help improve overall organizational efficiency?
Both of those systems, both the performance management and learning management, are critical to help organize and coordinate the processes. Everybody's used to doing things online nowadays, and so anytime you have a system that is not easy to use or is not set up so that you can make it so that the user has a good experience with it, then you have some struggles. And so performance management has to be an easy, uncomplicated process, and it must be short. And those systems both play with each other, because if I'm in a performance management system and I'm trying to create a culture of learning, then I need that learning management system to be linked together with my performance, and actually linked together with career succession and succession planning both. So having a total organizational system is really critical to the business. I mean, think about it. If you're a manufacturer, or even if you're a service industry, your main computer system that does billing and shipping and all the rest of those kind of things has to talk to each other. And so the same thing for performance management. You've got to integrate both of those into the business. So they have to be business processes for them to be effective. I mean, if you think about it, if learning and organizational development is just kind of thought of as, oh, that's that nice to have thing, but we're going to be working on the business, then you're not having the seat at the table. So it has to be integrated into everything that you do. So when you're creating performance management, it's got to be based on business strategy, right? And when you're creating a learning management system, it's got to be based on business strategy. So all of it intertwines or interconnects with each other so that the business can be more efficient and more effective moving forward. And that's the whole gambit. That's all the way back to the first conversation that I have with somebody who may be my employee, all the way through to what happens when an employee retires through the mentoring process, and then eventually retires and leaves the company. So I think it's critical that when we look at those systems, when we look at performance management systems or learning management systems, or the way that we set competencies up, we've got to have those all connected so that they all function as one. And it's just part of the way we do things moving forward.
leading training professionals, across multiple states and international facilities. Now, it's a complex task. So,
Mhm.
how can organizations tailor leadership development programs to address the unique needs and challenges of today's workforce in the context of this remote work and virtual leadership? How can organization tailor the leadership development programs to address these questions?
So I think the first answer to that is that learning and organizational development professionals and HR professionals as well have to understand that we need to ask our customers. So we need to do needs analysis, and not just on the surface and not just, a few times. It needs to be continuous. I mean, if you think about the changes that's happened over the last, and I'll just say 3 years, in technology and work and all the rest of those things, we need to be very connected to our customers and really understand what it is that they need, what it is that we need to focus on. And then we build leadership development processes around that. So, for instance, the remote work, like we talked about before. I'm really not sure that very many learning and organizational development, leadership development classes or whatever even include anything about technology. How do you use it? And how do you I remember when we first switched to Microsoft Office, or Microsoft 365 or whatever. We tried to do virtual events. This was at the beginning of COVID or whatever. And some of the sales guys were like, I can't even do my presentations anymore. I don't know how to share my screen. I don't know how to share a document. And we backed up and thought, wow, how silly is that we haven't asked them what their needs are in the last, couple of 3 months with all these changes, and then provided them what it was that they need. So I think needs analysis continuously going forward, not just once a year, but kind of a continuous contact with your customer and constantly asking that question is kind of the first piece of the puzzle. Especially for really strong leadership development, because there's some technical things that they need to learn along with the human processes that they need to learn as well. And then the second step after that, I think, is making sure that when you provide this training, that it's really a need for training. How many times does an HR person and an L&D person get a call saying, "Hey, my team's in conflict. We need conflict training." And the first question, our first answer most of the time from L&D people is, "Great, we've got a conflict management class. We're going to send you through it." They send them through the class, and then the manager calls back about 4 weeks later and saying, "Hey, that class didn't work. We still have conflict." And so again, from the professional learning and organizational development person, they've really got to be a business person. So they've got to ask those questions. Really, conflict. Well, tell me more about that. Oh, yeah. This guy and this guy never get along with each other and whatever. Okay, great. What else is going on? Well, we just changed the system completely. And so now we this, and they lost 3 vacation days. And it's like, okay, now I'm starting to get the clear picture of exactly what's happening in that department. And then I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to go spend time with those people that are in conflict in this team and say, "Tell me what's going on. What's hard here? What's easy here?" And so I think a lot of times we jump to training or jump to a leadership development class without really understanding what it is that's going on. And so we end up becoming order takers. Hey, I need a conflict class. Oh, here it is. Hey, I need a class on this. Oh, there it is. And we need to back away from that and actually become business partners, because that's when you get the seat at the table, when you're solving business issues. So now when the manager calls back 3 weeks later, after we actually just reorganized their small team, and we did some changes in leadership or whatever, now the guy calls back and says, "Wow, incredible. I can't believe the way these people are acting now versus what they act before." So I was working for a company one time that made electronics, and the engineering team and the purchasing team hated each other. And I mean, truly hated each other. In fact, the purchasing team would buy the wrong item, one number off, and then send it to the engineering team and say, "Okay, here's what you ordered." And the engineering team would find very obscure, no longer produced items, and then send it to purchasing and say, "We need 3 of these," kind of thing. So, I mean, you can tell the efficiency of the business was just falling apart. And so they said, "Hey, look, we've got all this terrible thing going on. We need to we need to resolve this conflict because it's costing us money." So what I did is brought the two teams together. And of course, one team sat on one side of the table, the other team sat on the other side of the table. And then I simply said to them, look, you guys know what's going on. You know that this conflict is costing us money. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn about each other first. Purchasing team, I want you to spend some time and tell the engineering team exactly what you do, all the hard things, all the things that you have to struggle through, all that kind of stuff. And then when you're done, engineering team is going to do the same thing. And then we're going to put up on the flip charts what we want the other person to do. So after you've told all the difficulty of what you're doing, we're going to put something up on the flip chart to say, here's what I want the engineering team to do. I need them to do blah, 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 blah. And then engineering team, we're going to do the same thing for the purchasing team. And what do you think happened? Well, all of a sudden they're communicating. All of a sudden they're having a complaining session or whatever each other, and then they realize, oh, we're both in the same boat. We both have struggles. We both don't have all the things we need. We both and so that communication and that building together and that understanding of the underlying reason why the process was going wrong, what was really happening. I could have sent both teams to a conflict resolution class, wouldn't accomplish anything. So again, that's kind of the second part of us as professional HR folks, is really understanding what the underlying factors are of the customer, and then providing them with what they really need, not what they think they need.
So, in your view, what capabilities are crucial for professionals who are aspiring to build their careers in L&OD? Now, we have talked about L&OD professionals helping business functions.
Oftentimes, we as learning and organizational development people or HR people, we want other people to learn, but we need to look internally as well. So we need to be a demonstration of what we're talking about. So a continuous learner, even in class, when you look at learning and organizational development people, there's a whole set of skills: facilitation skills, listening skills, use of silence. I mean, there's just a ton of skills that they can use. You should constantly be working on them. Never be satisfied that you've achieved or you're the best facilitator or the best teacher out there. Constantly looking for that feedback to say, how can I improve and make myself better? And actually then making that transition yourself so that you're becoming a business partner. You're spending time with your customers, with your clients, with your executives or whatever, talking about L&OD as a business piece. So, oftentimes I would go talk to the chief operating officer in a manufacturing environment and say to them, so how's the leadership development piece going? Oh yeah, people love it. People, think it's great. I saw the last time you had some really good, feedback from the group, and I said, well, that's good. I appreciate that as someone who created it and instructed it. It's fabulous. But tell me how it's going. Are you seeing a change in your business, in efficiencies and effectiveness and labor hours per man hour? And he went, wow, well, I don't think any L&OD person's ever asked me that question. So you got to learn to speak their language. You've got to fall into the category of, look, I'm the COO. I'm the person who does those things, and I need to have that perspective so that I'm asking him those kind of questions. Because once I started asking him those kind of questions, now guess what data is he's feeding me? He's feeding me, labor per man hour. He's feeding me the ups and downs. He's giving me charts that he looks at every day that I, as a learning and organizational development or HR person, should be looking at every day. And so it changes the conversation from, hey, what class do you need me to create, to, hey, what business problem do you need me to solve? And I think a lot of times HR and L&OD people, transition in name. They go from HR manager to HR business partner. But again, it's that mindset of, how do I get those COOs, the CEOs, the chief legal officer, all of the C-suite, even the VPs, to begin to communicate to me as a business person, not as an L&OD or HR person. I think too many times HR takes on the role that they want us to, and we've got to step back into that role of business partner, using our communication and using that questioning skill. And that communication is critical on a daily basis. I mean, there probably wasn't a day goes by that I don't talk to one of the C-suite folks about. So I hear that we've got some legal issues that we're working on, and that we're doing some classes in India on this particular thing. Tell me what happened. Oh yeah, well, we ended up with the Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever, and so now I'm learning their language, right? I'm learning how to speak back to them. So the next time I have a conversation, that's what I'm asking about. I'm asking about, whatever the new regulation is out that we need a class for or whatever. So again, I'm providing them with a business need, not just training and development.
We spoke about LMS briefly in a couple of questions before. Now, how do organizations leverage these technologies effectively? And what are the advancements or the trends you see shaping the future of learning management?
From my perspective, you always got to start with the end in mind. So when you're either choosing or changing the learning management system, you have to really understand what the business needs are. And so that's kind of the first piece. But the second piece, really, from a learning management perspective, is working with that vendor to align what they're giving you content wise with your mission and values, right? So oftentimes I'll have a vendor, doesn't matter who it is, I'll have them map everything that they have from a training class perspective to our core values or to our mission. A lot of times you can customize the training that they provide to include that. And so oftentimes the first slide in any training class that was in the LMS was our mission and vision. And so every time somebody went and took a class, they're focused on what the business needs are, the mission and vision, not just on, oh, here's how to do Microsoft Excel, whatever. I want them focused in that way. And so working with the vendor and making sure that it doesn't really have to be customized. You don't have to customize every course, but just having them mapped back to what the business focus is and the core values and what we stand for as a company and our mission and vision, I think is critically important, especially for the generations that are starting into the workforce now. The millennials and the Z's who are coming into the workforce really care about what the mission and the values of the organization are. So working with those LMS vendors, working with the people who provide that content with you, tying that together so that they can see that in everything they do. Again, I don't care if they're taking an Excel class. I want the first slide to say, here's the mission of the company. Here's the vision of the company. Now, the reason you're taking this Excel class is so that you can continue to move towards that. That's exactly right. It doesn't matter how minor you think this is. This is to improve your efficiency so that we can serve that customer better, or whatever the value is, or it's an integrity thing. The reason you're taking this IT security class is because one of our core values is integrity, and integrity in data for us and our customers just as important as integrity in anything else. So that's why you're taking this mandatory IT training class, which everybody has. So again, I think the wave of the future is looking at LMS partners that are willing to do those kinds of things and ready to do those kinds of things. And again, they look at themselves as business partners to you more than just, oh, we have 1,000 courses in our catalog. Well, that's great, but I'm probably going to use 5 of them because none of the rest of them apply to our business. And so again, making sure that they're your business partner and they're providing, again, what the business needs, and looking at that in the beginning, not later on. Not saying, well, we can add those courses later. No, we want to make sure that we're aligned up front and that we're getting the courses that we need specifically, and it all ties back to the business, all ties back to what our values are and what our vision and mission is.
So, your mission statement emphasizes exhausting your talents to the fullest. In this realm of global leadership, what capabilities do you believe are essential for leaders?
I'll begin with saying that back in 1994, when I first started working for a food manufacturing company, my boss, he had 2 master's degree, and we had the conversation about that leadership really needs to change from a command and control, kind of an old style leadership, to a team-based, empowering style of leadership. And we're still having that conversation today. 30 years later, it's the same conversation. So one of the things I think that from a leadership standpoint that we really need to focus on, especially in ours, is again, We need to act the part. We need to walk the talk, behave the way we want other people to behave. But in that, we need to make sure that we're holding other people accountable for what they're not doing. And so, for instance, a really good friend of mine, his name's Brett, works in a electronic manufacturing firm and that kind of stuff. And we're having a conversation the other day about a couple of his employees. I think he has 60 employees, a couple of his employees who are managers, and that one of the managers was kind of a really straightforward, kind of a brash kind of person. And he said, I can deal with him well, but it makes it challenging. And so I said, great, what are you doing about that? Well, he's one of my best supervisors. And so he's efficient and effective. And so he's getting the product out. And I said, great, I'm glad to hear that. What's your turnover? Well, it's pretty high. And I said, are you surprised? You're not doing anything about his leadership style. You're allowing him to continue to treat people in the old style. So guess what's going to happen when all of the people that were in previous generations retire or move away, and you end up with the new generation who was not raised that way? So I think oftentimes just raising your awareness as a leader that things are different and you cannot use the same style and have people bring their best self to work. It just doesn't work. When there's fear of, one of my biggest things that I fight against when I teach a leadership development class is when I ask the question, what do you do when a guy's been late to work 5 times in a row? You know, the answer I always get, write him up. Okay, so it becomes a fear-based write-up kind of situation. They didn't say sit him down and talk to him and find out what's going on. They didn't say understand his personal life. They didn't say none of that. They said write him up, and that way we've got that documentation, for HR and whatever. That's so wrong-headed in my opinion that it's hard for me to even get past that, because that's old style management. It really is. And does it work? I often ask the question, think about the last time you were written up. When you were written up, you walked away from that meeting saying, okay, I'm ready to go, I'm excited, I'm going to do my best work. No, you don't say that. You say that dang supervisor, I can't believe he wrote me up, and I'll show them, I'll do right. And so you can't bring your best self to work if you're in that kind of environment. So I think from a leadership standpoint, raising our awareness that things are different and we must behave differently, and then finding a different model. Our model has always been the old model, and we need to really find a different model today so that we can be more effective. Because when we're effective as a leader, that's when we keep people. That's when we succeed. That's when we start changing our behavior to empower other people more. That's when we really make success. Most leaders nowadays have risen through the ranks, so they know exactly how to do the job. And in a stressful situation, what do? They go back to doing the job. But let me tell you a quick story. So we were doing some training. One of the supervisors came to me and said, look, tomorrow we're going to have some struggles. On my boxing line, I only have 5 people and then a team lead. Well, tomorrow the team lead's not going to be there, and one person is already called off, and we've got a big order we have to get through. And so I'm going to jump in and help them do this production. And I said, no, you're not. And she said, well, I have to. I'm 2 people short. I have no team lead. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to gather everybody together, and then I want you to give them all that data. Say, look, I got no team lead. He's on vacation. We got a person calling off, so it's only going to be the 4 of us. And I've got meetings to go to. So talk to me about how we can make this happen. So she said they looked at each other for a few minutes, and then they started saying, well, once I'm finished with that, why don't I walk down and I'll help Donna do that? And then Bob, why don't, when you start on this, then you can come up here and help. And so guess what they were doing? They were taking ownership of that. Now, she told me that it was very difficult for her to stand back and watch these 3 employees do everything that they were doing without her jumping in and doing that. But I said she really took on the leadership role at that point. She gave them that vision. She gave them that challenge. And she constantly said, you guys are doing great. She did with all the encouragement. They normally finish their hot orders at 11 p.m. at night on that particular shift. By 10 o'clock, they were done. 1 person short, no team lead, and she stood outside and let them do it. And so for me, that was such a strong such a strong example of exactly what I'm talking about empowering other people to really take ownership of those things. And guess how the people felt at 10 o'clock when they got to go home an hour early? I mean, they were elated, right? And then the next day, she's handing out, thank you notes to them about what's your great work. And so, guess how they behaved that next day? I mean, to me, that's that transition of moving away from Jimmy being the leader and telling people what to do, and Jimmy being the leader and allowing people to do what they do best.
What is your advice? What have you observed in your career which can be fruitful for the listeners and professionals who want to walk in your shoes?
Two different things I can think of right away. Get around people that are thinking this way, right? Find in your network people that kind of believe in empowerment and believe in people and believe in that they can bring themselves to work, and begin those conversations. If there's something in the back of your head saying, no, my experience as a leader is these people are children. I've got to treat them like children. And the old adage, when you treat somebody like a child, guess how they act like a child. So get around people that think differently, that think more inclusively, that think more from the standpoint of how do I empower these people? That would be the first thing. So in your network, find people that believe that way and have those conversations. Second, again, from a tips and tools technique, read. If you're not reading 4 books a month, that's only one a week, then you're not staying current on what's going on. And I'm not talking about just new releases. I'm actually reading a book from 1974 on organizational design and development. And the weird part about it is everything this guy is saying from the 1974 book is still true today. And so, dive deep into that kind of stuff. If you're in human resources, find somebody who was a guru back in the 80s and read what they said and find out. So that would be my second piece of advice. I think a lot of times when I'm in a training class or I'm talking to an executive, even doing coaching or whatever, those quotes from those books come into my head, and it changes the way that I communicate, and it changes the stories I tell, and what the way that I work. And so that would be my second piece of tool or technique, would be to read. And then finally, the third piece is find out what it's going to take for you to make that transition into that leader who actually empowers other people. Give it a shot. If you're an HR manager, I'm sure you've got some HR specialists, that work for you or whatever. Try it out. Just see the difference, because I guarantee you, once you start trying it, you'll never go back. Because once you see the dynamic change in the way that these people operate and the way that they show up at work, it'll be such a shock to you. It'll be like, wow, I've been running around like a chicken with my head cut off, solving all these problems. And so I've stopped doing that. And now I've started asking them to solve the problem. What do you think the best way is to solve it? You think that's the best way? Great. Well, go try that and let me know how that works. That change in the way that you're empowering people, when you see the results of that, you'll never go back. I mean, you really won't. It'll be one of those situations where it's continued growth. And then my final one is resilience. Um, Oftentimes you try these things and you fail, right? And the best thing to do is what everybody says: get up and keep walking forward. You have to be resilient. You can't get to the point where you say, this isn't working, I'm not going to move forward. And so you've got to have that resiliency. And you can take classes on being more resilient, or you can just practice resiliency in your life, and that will help you continuously move forward. Oftentimes as a learning and development or an HR professional, it's those incremental changes that you can make. A lot of times you can't redesign the whole entire thing, but you can slowly but surely move in a direction. And so for me, that's resiliency. I'm taking small little bites, but I'm moving in that direction because I know that's where I want to end up. I think that's probably one of the best ways, and something I've done in my career, is slowly but surely added these little things and kept moving in the direction I knew was the right direction. And so eventually, before you know it, you arrive and you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. I can do some of these things. And I am having different impact and different results than I had before. Yeah. I don't think you ever arrive, but you head in that direction anyway. Yeah.
Wonderful talking to you.